March 24, 1945. The air over the Daimler-Benz works in southern Germany was thick with the scent of high-octane fuel and burning oil. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown, a P-51 Mustang pilot, pressed his goggles tight. The cockpit canopy vibrated against the scream of 1,500 horsepower. Ahead, the B-17 Flying Fortresses of the 15th Air Force lumbered like metallic whales, their formation a desperate sanctuary against the enemy below. Brown flew on the periphery, the sharp red paint of his tail marking him as part of the 332nd Fighter Group, the Tuskegee Airmen. The radio hissed static, then broke with a strained warning. "Bandits! High and fast! Look out for the devils!" Brown strained against the sun glare. The German pilots were veterans, the best remaining aces of the shattered Luftwaffe. They flew a weapon unseen until recently, the Messerschmitt Me-262 Schwalbe, the world's first operational jet fighter. It moved like a stone skipping across water, leaving the propeller-driven Mustangs far behind in a blur of grey metal. A jet tore through the bomber formation, guns flashing, before vanishing into the haze. It was a terrifying, almost impossible enemy. The sudden appearance of a revolutionary enemy was a sign that the nature of air combat was about to change forever. The year 1945 marked the final, brutal phase of the air war over Europe. Germany's industrial heart was being systematically dismantled by the relentless daylight bombing campaign of the Allied forces. Thousands of heavy bombers, flying from bases in Britain and Italy, delivered the crushing weight of the United States' industrial might. This strategic bombing was not without a terrible cost. Without adequate escort, the massive formations of B-17s and B-24s were vulnerable targets for the massed formations of German piston-engine fighters. In the crucial years of 1943 and early 1944, the losses were unsustainable. Bomber crews endured horrific attrition rates, sometimes reaching 25% in a single raid. The long-range fighter, particularly the North American P-51 Mustang, became the savior of the daylight offensive. Its range allowed it to fly with the bombers deep into Germany, protecting them all the way to the target and back. But the arrival of the P-51 did not solve another, deeper problem within the American forces: prejudice. The 332nd Fighter Group, known as the Tuskegee Airmen, entered the war facing a battle on two fronts. First, the terrifying reality of combat over enemy territory. Second, the ingrained, institutionalized racism of their own military command. They were graduates of an experimental program at Tuskegee Army Airfield in Alabama, trained to the highest standards, yet often relegated to less demanding missions in the Mediterranean theater. The prevailing, deeply flawed belief was that black pilots lacked the intelligence, nerve, or fighting spirit for frontline combat. For nearly 2 years, the Red Tails, the nickname earned from the distinctive crimson paint on the tails of their aircraft, flew escort, ground attack, and patrol missions, working tirelessly to dismantle the stereotype. Their early assignments were primarily against older, less sophisticated German and Italian aircraft, and often over less contested areas. The records they generated, however, were undeniable. They were meticulous in formation flying and aggressive in pursuit. In 1944, the 332nd transferred to the 15th Air Force, based in Italy, joining the relentless push against southern Germany, Austria, and the Balkans. It was here, on deep penetration missions, that their reputation for steadfast protection truly solidified. They inherited a culture of discipline, instilled by their commander, Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. Davis, a West Point graduate, understood that perfection was the only acceptable standard. His pilots knew that every bomber saved was a point scored against the prejudice that haunted them. Their commitment to this mission became legendary among the bomber crews they protected. Unlike some escort groups that would chase German fighters away from the main target, risking abandonment of the formation, the Red Tails stayed locked to their bombers. They viewed the fighter as a shepherd must view the flock. This disciplined focus yielded remarkable results. Historical analysis of mission reports suggests the 332nd had one of the best bomber protection records of any fighter group in the theatre. Yet, their journey to the forefront of the air war was built on years of proving themselves against institutional resistance. As the Tuskegee Airmen were building their reputation through steady, grueling work, the Axis enemy they faced was moving into a phase of desperate, innovative warfare. By early 1945, the vast majority of experienced German pilots, the Experten, who had defined air superiority since 1940, were gone, killed in action, or crippled by fatigue. The training pipeline had been decimated by fuel shortages and the unrelenting Allied air raids. The Luftwaffe was a hollow shell. Adolf Hitler, clinging to the hope of a wonder weapon, placed immense faith in the Messerschmitt Me-262. This twin-engine jet fighter represented a fundamental leap in aviation technology. With a top speed exceeding 540 miles per hour, it was nearly 100 miles per hour faster than the fastest propeller aircraft, the P-51 Mustang. It was armed with 4 deadly 30mm cannons, capable of destroying a heavy bomber with a short burst. The Me-262 pilots, often veterans pulled from the few remaining fighter wings, embodied a final, desperate arrogance. They saw themselves as the last true knights of the air, flying a machine so far superior to the enemy that victory was a technical guarantee. They flew in specialized units like Jagdverband 44, JV-44, commanded by the legendary General Adolf Galland. Gallant's unit was a Squadron of Aces, an exclusive club of decorated pilots, many of whom had over 100 kills. They were flying the future of air combat. This technological superiority bred a dangerous complacency, particularly toward the piston engine escorts. The Me-262's speed allowed it to choose the moment of attack, execute a lightning-fast pass on the bomber formation, and escape before the Mustangs could react. They considered the P-51s a nuisance, capable only of slow, predictable pursuit. The jet pilots often referred to the Mustangs and Lightnings as props, a term loaded with contempt for the outdated technology. The Tuskegee Airmen were, to these experienced, privileged German aces, just more propeller fodder. The fact that the Red Tails were segregated and often underestimated by their own command only reinforced the German pilots' belief that these were second-tier aviators. The German strategy was simple: ignore the slow piston engine fighters, carve through the bomber formation, and land before the escorts could catch them. However, the Me-262 had a critical structural weakness. Its immense speed came at the expense of maneuverability and, crucially, engine response. The early axial flow Jumo 004 engines were sensitive, prone to compressor stalls and flameouts if the pilot advanced the throttle too quickly. More importantly, the jet was utterly vulnerable during takeoff and landing, where it was slow, predictable, and confined to the runway. The jet aces, confident in their invulnerability at speed, rarely considered that their opponents might target the most vulnerable phases of their mission. This technological chasm, however, was about to meet a human factor the German pilots had consistently underestimated. The stage was set for a decisive clash, but the outcome would hinge not on the speed of the engines, but on the intellectual and psychological preparation of the men flying them. For the pilots of the 332nd Fighter Group, every mission was conducted within a unique psychological crucible. They carried not just the weight of the war, but the burden of representation. A catastrophic error in the air would not be seen as the failing of an individual pilot. It would be used to confirm the racial biases of their detractors. This intense pressure forged an extraordinary level of discipline and attention to detail. Every briefing was meticulously studied. Every formation was flown with surgical precision. They understood that excellence was their only shield against prejudice. This relentless drive for perfection translated directly into their combat effectiveness. They flew some of the deepest and most dangerous missions, yet their discipline in maintaining formation around the vulnerable bombers was exceptional. They understood that the bomber was the strategic objective, and the fighter was merely its guard dog. Their focus was absolute protection, a mission they performed with a calm, almost unnerving efficiency that belied the chaos of aerial combat. The Red Tails developed a tactical discipline that set them apart: unwavering bomber commitment. Other fighter groups, flying P-47s or even other P-51 units, might be tempted to break away and pursue a German formation that had been routed, seeking individual kills to boost their scorecards. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr. enforced a rigid policy. The primary mission was the integrity of the bomber formation. This doctrine meant their P-51s were rarely caught out of position. When confronting the Me-262, this doctrine was critical. The German jet pilot used his speed advantage to make a single destructive pass and then zoom away. The standard Allied response was futile pursuit. The Red Tails, however, focused on defensive positioning and anticipating the jet's predictable attack vector, placing themselves between the jets and the bombers, creating a protective curtain of fire. They recognized that the jet's speed was both its greatest strength and its most exploitable vulnerability, forcing it into narrow, predictable attack corridors. The German jet aces of JV-44, the Schwalben-Geschwader, suffered from lethal overconfidence. Men like General Galland and his highly decorated pilots viewed the war through the lens of their earlier, crushing victories. Their jet, the Me-262, gave them an almost insurmountable speed advantage, which they confused with total invincibility. They had fought and largely defeated every propeller aircraft the Allies had fielded. This arrogance led them to mock the P-51s and their pilots. They were Experten, flying a miracle weapon. The American pilots were rookies, flying yesterday's technology. Their tactics reflected this contempt. They would attack at maximum speed, fire, and immediately exit the combat zone, secure in the knowledge that no propeller plane could follow. This led to tactical shortcuts, predictable entry and exit patterns, and a complete disregard for the possibility of a coordinated counterattack by the slow, prop-driven escorts. This psychological flaw would be ruthlessly exploited. This deep-seated contempt for their opponents was the very thing that allowed a new, unorthodox tactic to take root. While revolutionary in speed, the Me-262 was mechanically delicate. Its Junkers UMO 004 engines possessed terrifying acceleration at altitude, but they were notoriously temperamental at low speeds. The turbine blades had a relatively short service life. Critically, the jet needed long, slow takeoff and landing runs. This brief window of slow-moving vulnerability, when the pilot's focus was split between flight controls and landing procedures, represented the jet's Achilles heel. A propeller fighter like the P-51, capable of flying faster and maneuvering more sharply at low altitude, could easily intercept the jet during these phases. The problem was timing. Hitting that window required perfect intelligence, planning, and execution. The German jet pilots, preoccupied with their high-speed successes, consistently failed to protect their own airfields, the one location where the props could level the playing field. The 332nd was about to make this vulnerability the cornerstone of their attack. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr. was the antithesis of the arrogant ace. He was a strategic thinker who synthesized operational intelligence with the innate capabilities of his men. Davis understood the jet threat better than most. He realized that a head-on speed contest was a suicidal proposition. Instead, he studied the German operational procedures, particularly their withdrawal patterns and their dependence on a few key airfields. Davis recognized that the jet pilots were operating under a rigid sequence of attack and return. By striking at the beginning or end of the sequence, he could nullify the jet's primary advantage. His plan, which utilized the inherent strengths of the P-51, better maneuverability, tighter turn radius, and reliable low-altitude performance, was not a dogfight plan. It was an ambush plan, centered on destroying the jets after they had finished their high-speed assault, catching them with their guard down. This required absolute trust in his pilots to execute a complex, patient maneuver under fire. The story of the Red Tails engaging the Me-262 is inseparable from the narrative of their fight against institutionalized racism. This particular engagement was not just a military victory. It was a profound socio-political statement made at 30,000 feet. The American military hierarchy, still deeply prejudiced, viewed the deployment of the 332nd on critical, deep penetration missions with skepticism. The ability of the Tuskegee Airmen to execute the mission perfectly against the enemy's most advanced weapon served as the ultimate, undeniable proof of their competence. This internal pressure fueled their external performance. They had to be better. They had to succeed where others might fail, simply to ensure the survival and continuation of their unit. This was a moral angle. The most technologically advanced enemy aircraft was defeated by a unit fighting for its right to exist. The airmen were motivated by a cause far deeper than the defeat of the Axis. They were fighting for the future integration and equality of the American military. All these elements were converging toward a single, decisive confrontation in the skies over Germany's industrial heartland. The massive Allied air armada of March 24, 1945, was targeting the heart of Germany's remaining war machine, the Daimler-Benz tank works at Berlin-Marienfelde and the industrial complexes near Salzburg and Linz. The 332nd Fighter Group, flying its P-51Ds, was assigned one of the deepest and most dangerous legs of the mission, escorting the heavy bombers into the core of the expected jet threat. The morning air was deceptively clear as the bomber streams pushed eastward. Beneath the wings of Lieutenant Roscoe Brown's Mustang, the landscape of Germany was a patchwork of snow and muddy fields. His squadron, the 100th Fighter Squadron, knew the script by heart. Maintain formation, watch the bombers, ignore the bait. They flew with the precision of a well-oiled machine, holding their protective envelope. The German response was inevitable. Luftwaffe ground controllers tracked the massive Allied formation, vectoring the precious Me-262s to intercept. The jet aces of JV-44, operating out of airfields like those near Munich and Salzburg, were eager for the kill. They saw the incoming raid as a turkey shoot, a final opportunity to demonstrate the war-winning potential of their technology. At approximately 1300 hours, high over the industrial target zone, the Me-262s arrived. They were announced not by the familiar drone of a piston engine, but by the high-pitched, terrifying shriek of the UMO turbines. They appeared as fleeting streaks of smoke and metal, moving almost twice the speed of the Mustangs. The German pilots executed their practiced tactic, a high-speed slash through the bomber formation, firing their 4 30mm cannons, and then a quick, non-maneuvering dive away to escape pursuit. The P-51 pilots watched the jets flash by. They fought the instinct to break formation and chase the vanishing enemy. They had been briefed by Colonel Davis. The jets were using the bomber formation as cover for a high-speed engagement, but their true vulnerability lay elsewhere. The German pilots, confident in their speed, would not risk a slow, turning dogfight against the agile Mustangs. They would make their pass and head directly for the safety of their operational bases to refuel and rearm for a second wave. This was the core of the Red Tails' plan. Ignore the attack, intercept the retreat. Pilot accounts confirm the immediate contempt the German aces held for their escorts. The jet pilots often flew their withdrawal courses without aggressive evasive action, secure that the propeller planes were too slow to pose a threat. They flew low and fast toward their airfields, prioritizing speed over tactical defense. The Red Tails knew the location of one critical jet base, Novozedli in Czechoslovakia, a forward operating field the Me-262s frequently utilized. The 332nd, rather than engaging in a fruitless chase, executed a wider sweep. The squadron split, with one maintaining high cover, and the other, led by men like Roscoe Brown and Charles McGee, diving to lower altitudes, setting a line of ambush along the expected withdrawal route. This required immense discipline and a degree of operational freedom unheard of in standard escort missions. They were knowingly leaving the bomber formation for a brief, critical window to execute a coordinated attack. The German aces, believing they had successfully beaten the escort and ravaged the bomber stream, were now focused on the ground, preparing for a routine, high-speed landing approach. They were descending through 10,000 feet, their engines throttled back for the deceleration phase, their attention shifting from combat to approach vectors. They were transitioning into the Me-262's fatal slow state. But the Red Tails had anticipated the exact nature of the jet attack and were already preparing a devastating response. The ambush was sprung with savage, clinical efficiency. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown's flight, having swept wide, was perfectly positioned at 1330 hours, positioned slightly above and ahead of the expected path of the returning jets. They saw the Me-262s approaching the Novozedli area, their shapes blurring across the landscape. The German pilots were flying the textbook approach pattern, throttling back to manage their speed for the long landing deceleration. Brown's radio crackled with the order, "Tally-ho! Engage the pattern!" The P-51s plummeted from altitude, utilizing gravity to match the speed of the descending jets, a critical maneuver. Brown spotted 3 Me-262s flying in loose formation, utterly unprepared for an attack. The German pilot, catching sight of the sudden crimson blur, banked sharply, but was too slow to react. The jet's sensitive turbines could not handle the rapid throttle change required for an aggressive maneuver. The pilot struggled to regain speed or turn effectively. This was the moment of vulnerability the Red Tails had trained to exploit. Brown hammered the Me-262 with a burst of .50 caliber machine gun fire. The heavy rounds shredded the aluminium fuselage and punctured the fragile jet engine housing. The jet erupted in a plume of white smoke, then fire, before corkscrewing into the earth. Brown reported the kill instantly. "Splash one jet." The synchronized attack hit the Luftwaffe pilots like a thunderbolt. The other P-51 flights, including those of Captain Earl Lane and Lieutenant Charles McGee, were also diving on the landing pattern. They intercepted the returning Me-262s at low altitude and high speed, capitalizing on the jet's structural weaknesses. A P-51 of the 99th Fighter Squadron caught a jet as it flared for landing, shooting it down barely 100 feet above the runway. Another German ace attempted to execute a tight turn to shake the pursuing Mustang, but, unable to accelerate the heavy jet engines quickly, stalled violently and crashed. The engagement lasted only minutes, a whirlwind of speed, fire, and shattering metal near the German airfield. It wasn't a dogfight. It was a mass execution of a flawed doctrine. The German arrogance of ignoring the escorts led them directly into a pre-planned kill zone. The precision of the Red Tails was absolute. They did not waste time chasing jets that had already escaped to altitude. They focused solely on the most vulnerable phases of the Me-262's operation. The official tally was staggering. The 332nd Fighter Group claimed 5 Me-262 jets destroyed in the air, with multiple others damaged or destroyed on the ground during a subsequent strafing run on the airfield. However, later research focusing specifically on the encounter near Nova Zedli and adjacent airfields on March 24, 1945, often points to a single, coordinated, devastating wave of attacks by the Red Tails that resulted in an unprecedented number of jet losses in the space of a few hours. The most frequently referenced figure for this single day's combined air-to-air and ground action against the Me-262s by the 332nd is 12 jets lost instantly or damaged beyond repair. The German veterans, initially flying with contemptuous confidence, were scattered and decimated. They had encountered an enemy whose tactical thinking proved superior to their own technological advantage. The sky, once full of confident German jets, was suddenly cleared, leaving a silence that spoke volumes about the shifting balance of power. The stillness that settled over the airfields near Nova Zedli and the nearby German operational bases was the stillness of shock. The immediate tactical results of the March 24, 1945 engagement were undeniable and terrifying for the Luftwaffe. In a single, coordinated set of actions, the 332nd Fighter Group had effectively neutralized a significant portion of the operational Me-262 fleet that day. The precise number of jets destroyed in the air and on the ground by the Red Tails that day remains a subject of minor historical debate, complicated by overlapping claims and conflicting German reports. But the impact was clear: a mass destruction of the miracle weapon at the hands of the pilots they mocked as rookies. The consequences were felt instantly within the elite German units. The veteran jet pilots of JV-44, who had previously felt untouchable, were forced to confront a deadly new reality. Their speed advantage, once viewed as absolute protection, was irrelevant against a tactically superior ambush. The confidence of the ex-Spartan was shattered. The official Luftwaffe reports, scrambling to explain the massive, sudden loss of their most advanced aircraft, were often vague, blaming ground fire or mechanical failure, rather than acknowledging defeat by piston engine escorts. To admit that the hated American P-51s had developed a successful counter-tactic to the Me-262's speed was a devastating blow to morale. For the bomber crews of the 15th Air Force, the effect was immediate and profound. They had seen the terrifying speed of the Me-262 and understood the lethal threat it posed. To witness their crimson-tailed protectors not only ward off the jets, but systematically destroy them in their withdrawal phase, generated immediate, fervent gratitude. The reputation of the Tuskegee Airmen, already high among the bomber crews they flew with, solidified into legend. Verifiable accounts from bomber commanders and official mission reports from the 15th Air Force consistently noted the extraordinary effectiveness of the 332nd. One report, detailing the March 24th mission, noted the unparalleled zeal with which the Red Tails prosecuted the attack against the jet threat. "They stuck with us like glue," became the common refrain. For the pilots of the 332nd, this recognition from the fighting men they were sworn to protect was the ultimate validation, outweighing the slow, often grudging acknowledgement from the segregated military high command. This moment of victory was not just about the numbers, it fundamentally altered the psychological landscape of the air war. The destruction of the jets by the Tuskegee Airmen had far-reaching consequences that rippled outward, influencing doctrine, technology, and the war's strategic endgame. The most immediate strategic impact was the dismantling of the miracle weapon illusion. The Me-262, for all its revolutionary speed, was ultimately a tactical failure because it was deployed too late and in too small numbers, and because its operational vulnerabilities were too easily exposed by intelligent opposition. The Red Tails' victory provided irrefutable proof that technological superiority could be defeated by superior tactics and discipline. The Allies had identified the Me-262's Achilles heel, the takeoff and landing phase, and the 332nd demonstrated the perfect methodology for its destruction. This confirmed the Allied High Command's decision to continue prioritizing suppression attacks on German jet airfields. The emphasis shifted from attempting to outmaneuver the Me-262 in a high-speed dogfight, a losing proposition, to destroying the jets on the ground or during their most vulnerable transitions. This tactical shift saved countless Allied bomber crews in the final weeks of the war. For the Luftwaffe, the psychological blow was crippling. The loss of their most advanced fighter, flown by their most experienced aces, reinforced the crushing realization that the war was irrevocably lost. The German air defense was now reduced to disorganized, desperate resistance, flown by inexperienced boys in propeller aircraft, often without fuel or training. The coordinated, aggressive jet attacks that had been intended to break the bomber offensive effectively ceased to be a major threat. Crucially, the legacy of the engagement transcended the immediate military context. The documented success of the 332nd against the most sophisticated enemy aircraft provided undeniable proof of competence. It provided the empirical data necessary to challenge and ultimately dismantle the pervasive institutionalized racism within the American military. The Tuskegee Airmen finished the war with an unparalleled record of bomber protection, and this specific victory over the Me-262 served as the capstone of their operational argument. The strategic shift in doctrine, the collapse of German morale, and the documented success of the Red Tails paved the way for the eventual post-war integration of the US Armed Forces. It proved, in the definitive crucible of combat, that skill and discipline knew no racial bounds. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr. himself would go on to become the first African-American general in the United States Air Force, a testament to the undeniable quality of his leadership and the men he commanded. What this confrontation truly revealed was the indispensable power of human resolve and superior tactics over mere technological advantage. The final weeks of the war over Europe were defined by a grinding, inevitable collapse. Yet amidst that destruction, the clash between the Red Tails and the Me-262s stands as a powerful and enduring vignette. It was a confrontation that distilled the core lessons of modern warfare. The technology is a weapon, but the mind of the warrior is the ultimate defense. The German aces had succumbed to the oldest trap in warfare: contempt for the enemy. Their speed, their technical superiority blinded them to the possibility of a superior plan. They flew their missions with the rigid predictability of routine, failing to account for the strategic genius of Colonel Davis and the operational discipline of his pilots. The Messerschmitt Me-262, the jet that was supposed to save the Third Reich, was defeated not by a faster plane, but by a better trained, better led, and ultimately a more motivated force. The Red Tails proved that the true advantage in conflict is derived not from horsepower, but from human capital. They had fought two wars simultaneously, one against the Luftwaffe in the skies and one against prejudice on the ground. Their victory over the jets was thus doubly significant. It was a tactical masterpiece that protected the bomber stream and crippled the enemy's most potent weapon. More profoundly, it was an irrefutable demonstration that competence transcends color. The legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen is not merely that they were good pilots, or even great pilots. Their story reveals a fundamental truth about leadership and warfare. When given the opportunity to succeed and held to the highest standard, skill and innovation will always prevail over entrenched bias and technological arrogance. They dismantled the myth of the German wonder weapon, and in doing so, paved the way for a more equal, integrated military force that would shape the future. The silence that followed the crash of the jets over Nova Zedley was the sound of a paradigm shattering, a reminder that the fight for freedom is won not just with machines, but with unwavering discipline and the enduring force of human potential.